able to hear me? Okay. Okay, we were talking about diabetes and we were left with the management part. We were talking about the novel drugs and uh, well, we like to so we like to rehearse whatever we taught in the last class. The management part from for diabetes. Uh, Diet is the first thing. We talked about the low carbohydrate, low fat diet, and we talked about the again the fat should be mostly in the form of uh, not in the form of a saturated, it should be more in the form of a monounsaturated one, and should be a plant-based meal would be mostly recommended. Polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fatty acid has been recommended. Then we talked about the carbohydrate one, where the complex carbs should be uh, prioritized over the simple carbohydrates. Then we talked about the exercise, like uh, especially the aerobics and isotonic exercises more than weightlifting, the cardio exercises, and it should be according to individual's capacity, and it could be anything around from 30 minutes per day to 150 minutes a week, and even from 3 to 4 days a week to every day a week, uh, 7 days a week, I mean. So then we talked about the oral hypoglycemic agents, and we were supposed to talk about insulin in, in this lecture. So you able to hear me? I mean, loud and clear. Is there any aberrations, or I hope you are able to listen to me. Okay, fine. So we're talking about the drugs and the pharmacotherapy. We have oral hypoglycemic agents and the insulin, and you have to know about the oral hypoglycemic agents, which are the traditional ones we talked about, like metformin and alpha glucoside. Then you have sulfonylureas and meglitinides. Almost they have almost similar mechanism, but the ons as the action is prolonged in sulfonylurea and meglitinides is short acting. Then you have metformin and thiazolidinediones, which are mostly of a insulin sensitizer, and basically then you have increase glucose uptake and utilization by the metformin and thiazolidinediones, and then you have alpha glucosidase inhibitors, which inhibit the absorption of mostly the saccharides, uh, disaccharides or monosaccharides on the proximal intestine. So these are the traditional drugs. What is important to know, basically, since mostly these drugs are used in diabetes type 2, as you all know, because in type 2 the main problem is insulin resistance, as well as peripheral the insulin sensitivity is reduced, insulin receptors are diminished on the peripheral, especially the peripheral tissues like muscles, fats, and then the other thing is the decrease in the liver neoglucogenosis. So even it also, anything which affects the neoglucogenosis through the liver, or any decrease in insulin sensitivity. So these are the two mechanisms by which the diabetes type 2 drugs act. They either they will try to induce insulin secretion or try to increase or enhance the insulin sensitivity. Then you have then sulfonylureas. The first generation is of historic importance. They have certain side effects. They're no longer used, as you must have read in pharmacotherapy. You have the second generation, glyburide, glipizide, glimepiride, gliclazide, and amongst this, glipizide is relatively short acting as compared to glimepiride and gliclazide. And the main side effect, as you all know, is hypoglycemia, because they induces insulin secretion through potassium channel, through the you have a SUR on receptor on the potassium channel, and the inhibition of the potassium channel it acts. Then we talked about the main side effects is the hypoglycemia, as we talk about, Then we have meglitinides is almost a similar group. The only thing is the repaglinide and metilinide, they have a short acting and they can be mostly used for the postprandial sugar control. And they have a similar receptor to sulfonylureas, which acts on the potassium channel on the beta cells. But the only thing is that they are short duration of action. Then biagonides, the metformin, the most traditionally, primarily the most important drug, and it is a first line treatment in all the different international or national, whatever the guidelines are there. You have metformin as the primary and the first line of treatment until it is contraindicated in patients with diabetes type 2. So again, the multiplicity of mechanism through which metformin acts. You have increased uptake and utilization of glucose by skeletal muscle through induction of more GLUT4 receptors, and which reduces the insulin resistance. Then inhibition of hepatic and renal gluconeogenesis, which again decreases hepatic glucose output predominantly, and then the slow downing the intestinal absorption of glucose. But that is a very minuscule mechanism, that is the absorption. Then biagonides, we talked about biagonides and thiazolidinediones, which interfere with the transcriptions of certain genes, and which again has to do with the expression of GLUT4 on the muscles fats. And so it is the peripheral insulin sensitizer is basically, and it is a moderate HbA1c reduction, so it is never used as a primary therapy. But the side effects, as we all know, bladder cancer as well as pedal edema, and especially in the patients with CCF, it can tend to cause cardiac failure in chronic cardiac patients. The alpha glucosidase inhibitor, it acts on the region intestinal level where it glucosidase enzymes. It inhibits alpha glucosidase and inhibits the absorption of monosaccharides and bisaccharides, and breaking down of disaccharides into monosaccharides. And so that's how it is mostly used as a postprandial sugar control, where as miglytol is 6 times more potent. And the most noticeable side effect is bloating, diarrhea, and flatulence that could be to a very great level that patients tend to discontinue this medicine. But the only thing about this medicine is this can be used along with insulin in type 1 diabetes. This is the only medicine which can be used along with, it's a very important MCQ for you, it can be used in type 1 insulin, because it basically inhibit carbohydrate absorption on the regional level at the intestine. And the other thing is that the HbA1c reduction is very less with this, only around 0.5 to 0.6%. So it's not a very potent drug as such. When we talked about insulin, then we talked about the newer drugs that are incretin mimetics, GLP-1 analog, and GIP. GLP-1 analog, these are incretins which are secreted by the small intestine, and what it tends to do, in the presence of glucose in the body and the intestine, it tends to induce insulin secretion in the beta cells. And there you have a short acting and a long acting GLP-1 analog in the form of exenatide, lisixenatide, liraglutide, and dulaglutide, semaglutide. What is the beauty of this drug is these longer acting drugs is the only first time in diabetes. This is a revelation there, which can be used once a week, subcutaneous injection. And important thing is it doesn't have hypoglycemic side effects, and the only adverse effect is nausea and postprandial bloating, and because it tends to also act on the central nervous system, and it causes decrease prolonged gastric emptying. So the feeling of nausea is quite high in cases of GLP-1 analog. So it is very nauseating, and it's not easy so we'll start with a lower dose initially, and with time the patient tends to get used to that nausea effect, and that effect is reduced with time. The patient get develops tolerance towards the nausea and the nauseating effect. So It can be used once a week. This is the beauty of that drug. Then you have DDP4 inhibitor, and what is important is DDP4 inhibitors, then SGL, then the GLP-1 analog. These can be used as a first-line drug along with metformin. And again, this is also it prevents the degradation of incretins, and that's how it enhances incretin effects, and in the form of sitagliptin, saxagliptin, linagliptin, and vildagliptin. Linagliptin is very important because it is not metabolized by the kidney, it is metabolized by the liver. That's why the linagliptin is a choice of drug in especially in the renal patients. And most importantly, these have a moderate HbA1c reduction rate, and it's a weight neutral for the patient. While GLP-1 analog induces weight loss, it has also been used as an anti-obesity drugs. But this DDP4 inhibitor has more of a insulin secretion and glucagon inhibition effects. And then you have sodium glucose co-transporter 2 inhibitors, SGLP2 inhibitors, which acts on the proximal tubules where any urinary glucose, 90% of the urinary glucose which is being absorbed in the proximal tubules, that has been taken care of, that has been done away with because of inhibition of the sodium glucose co-transport. The glucose is being excreted through the renal, to the urine, to the renal pathway, and so the urinary glucose losses increase. So it also has an added advantage of weight loss. It has a moderate HbA1c reduction rate by 0.7 to 1% in the form of canagliflozin, dapagliflozin, empagliflozin. It can be used in combination with metformin and DDP4 inhibitor. It's a fantastic drug. The only side effect is it can cause UTIs, especially in patients who are dehydrated. But the advantage is not only the weight loss, but also in the patient with cardiovascular risk or cardiovascular disease. This is a very important and potent drug. And the other thing is, especially in the patient with a history of pancreatitis, you don't tend to, it is not being prescribed in those patients. Then amylin mimetics, but still it has not been marketed in India, but it has a very has a strong potentially. It is a drug which doesn't, again one of the drug which can be used in type 1 diabetes, where it doesn't causes insulin secretion as such, but it induces satiety, it slows gastric emptying, and it suppresses pancreatic glucagon secretion. That is how it acts. And then you have the other bile acid binding resins like cholecystilam. These all are still in the trials. Then you have bromocriptine, and there are certain potential drug therapy which is still under trials. So, and there is something that glucokinase activator is still under trial. Now talking about insulin, this is a definitive therapy for diabetes. Insulin is basically diabetes is basically, as we know, is impaired insulin secretion or impaired insulin action, that is insulin deficiency or insulin resistance. So this is an insulin which can be used even in or not, it's a definitive for type 1, even in type 2 diabetes, which is not controlled or which has not been controlled through even after the patient has been put on 2 or 3 drugs, has not been controlled, and diabetes is under control, you can still initiate insulin in type 2 diabetes. And the history, as far as the history goes, insulin was discovered a long time back in 1921 by Banting and Best, as they extracted insulin from dog. But since then there have been so many advances, and especially the recent advances, as you can see the graph, how there have been newer drugs have been, and now what you will see is through the recombinant DNA technology, we have human analog insulins, which are so convenient, and it mimics the insulin secretory physiological action of the body to a great extent. So insulin therapy initially used to have porcine and bovine, this insulin being extracted from bovines and porks, but they had certain side effects of antibody development, insulin resistant reduction. So now we have some newer insulin which are being developed through to the recombinant DNA technology, and these are the beautiful insulins which is convenient to use, and they comes in a very easily administration, and they mimics the physiological insulin secretory pattern of the pancreas. So you have rapid acting insulin, the rapid acting or ultra short acting insulin, the form of Lispro, Aspart, or Glulicin. Then you have short acting, these are the regular insulin which used to be uh, uh, which was which we have been using very traditionally. Then you have intermediate acting, this is a neutral protamine H-DON, and this is how the time of action is, if it is being balanced against the time, the insulin effect. The rapid acting, it acts as soon as it's being administered. Within the 0 to 15 minutes starts acting, it peaks in 1 to 2 hours, and then it's by 4 to 5 hours it goes away from the body. While the short acting insulin, it starts acting in 15 to 20 minutes and peak around 2 to 3 hours, and then its effect stays for 8 to 10 hours. Then NPH is a neutral protamine H-DON. It's a intermediate insulin which tends to peak about 2 to 4 hours, and then it dissipates from the body about 10 to 14 hours. It's duration of time it acts. Then you have a certain beautiful long acting insulin which can be administered once a day, and they have a very flattening curve, as you can see. Their insulin action stays uniformly in the blood plasma, and the insulin effect is pretty uniform. But the only important thing is this long acting insulin, it can act up to 24 hours. The only thing is it doesn't address the insulin spikes which takes place with food. That is what it doesn't. Usually these long acting insulins, these are clubbed with the rapid acting insulin, so that in order to take care of the insulin spikes. Then you can see these types of insulin I talked about: rapid ultra short acting, rapid acting, Lispro, Aspart, and Glulicin. Basically these are developed through the DNA recombinant technology, and the amino acids chain have been displaced on the individual peptides. So basically through the reorganization of the amino acids and replacement of certain amino acids, these short acting insulin have been developed, and its onset is 15 to 30 minutes, peak is 1 to 1.5 hour, and duration is 3 to 5 hours. So basically it covers insulin needs for the meals eaten at the same time as the injections. Then the short acting, this is a traditional short acting regular insulin. This is 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 to 5 hours peak, and 5 to 8 hours duration, and it covers insulin needs for the meals eaten within 30 to 60 minutes. So usually it is supposed to be administered 15 to 20 minutes before the food, while this can be administered 5 to 10 minutes, or even with the meals it can be administered. Then you have intermediate acting insulin, the NPH. Again, the usual duration is 18 to 14 hours, and the peak is 4 to 12 hours. It covers insulin needs for about half the day or overnight. In the long acting insulin we were talking about, you have degludec, glargine, and tetramer. They are basically called peakless insulin because they have a uniform plasma insulin level, and as you can see the onset of action, and they are delivered at steady levels. And the degludec is the longest acting and insulin, and it can act up to 40 hours. Then you have premix insulin, where you have premix insulins are, as you know, the combination of specific proportions of intermediate acting and short acting insulin, and insulin pen is you have 30-70 combination, 50-70, 25, and 75. 30-70 stands and 50-50. So So 30/70 stands for 30 is the short acting and 70 is the intermediate acting. Then 50 short, 50 intermediate, 25 short, 25 intermediate. The onset of action, as you can see, 30 minutes, 25, 75. We have a shorter onset of action, and peak, as you can see, the peak, and the effect lasts up to almost they have 15 to 20 hours, and usually it can be given even 2 or 3 times a day before meal time. Then you have something called inhaler insulin in the form of Exubera and Afrezza. It's very expensive and still to be marketed in India. Exubera has been banned because it is supposed to cause certain COPD symptoms that have been banned in America and in European countries. Afzera is supposed to be safer. It has a peak of 12 to 15 minutes and duration of 2 to 3 hours, and basically it has a postprandial effects. So the indication for the insulin, as you know, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes with OHA failure, the oral hypoglycemic drugs failures, and then again the other uses for insulin indications are major surgery, during hospitalization, with in acute complication, learning acute complication like diabetic ketosis, acidosis, or hyperosmolar coma state, or your pregnancy, labor, delivery, and myocardial infarction, acute infections, or gestational diabetes. So usually when we start insulin, the overall dose we should be calculating. It is one thing is very important. It is again depends on the individual variation, on the individual makeup, physical makeup, even the kind of the other comorbidities, renal and liver profile, cardiovascular profile, then his profession, his status, his engagements, his everything has to be addressed while starting insulin dose. So it is a kind of a customized and individualized dose. We can't, but on a wider aspect, we can say in type 1 diabetes, usual dose is 0.2 to up to 1.1 to 0.2 unit per kg per day, and it can go up to 0.5 up to even 1 unit per kg per day. And in type 2 diabetes, usually it's 0.2 to 0.3 unit per kg per day. Again, still it can go anywhere higher level. And in a split mixed regimen, when we talk about the mixed insulin, the 2/3 as an intermediate acting insulin and 1/3 as a short acting insulin in the morning time, and in the evening time half of the basal and half of the bolus. So in a split mixed regimen, you have 2/3 as an intermediate acting and 1/3 as a short acting the morning time, and half of the intermediate acting and half of the short acting in the evening time. But in a basal bolus regimen, this is a different regimen. It's a basal bolus where you use basal is basically which acts for 24 hours. These are the long lasting insulin in the form of glargine, degludec, which is given once a day at a particular time period, whether 10 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the night. And this is a peakless, this is a uniformly distributed insulin, but it does not address the postprandial spikes. So for postprandial spikes, you have to use bolus, which is administered in the form of ultra short acting insulin, and it has to be administered before breakfast, before all the meals, breakfast, afternoon, and the night, and the evening and dinner time. So you have 3 aspart, glulicin. These are the ultra short acting insulin, and I'll show you. This is the Lispro, aspart, and glulicin. These are the ultra short acting, and this can be used as a boluses. Boluses means postprandial or after meals, immediately before meals, for the cover of the postprandial sugar level, because it can address the spikes. As you can see, it acts very fast, so it can address any spike in the sugar level after ingestion of meals, so it can immediately act. So before breakfast, so we can give it in a 3 time injections: before breakfast, before lunch, before dinner. While the long acting insulin we talked about, these those detramer and glargine, it is a peakless insulin, and it will keep a uniform steady level of insulin in the body. So this is called basal bolus regimen, which has been which has been widely accepted, and it's been prevalent worldwide. And the most importantly, because it most closely mimics the pattern, the pancreatic, the physiological insulin secretory pattern of the pancreas. And something, there is another thing is there is something called GDM, which is is called a continuous subcutaneous glucose infusion through this subcutaneously placed machine. But that is very expensive, and that is again they act on the same almost on the same pattern, these continuous glucose infusing devices, which are being placed on the subcutaneously around the umbilicus, and it again administer the basal insulin, and it is being you can even administer the boluses of ultra short acting insulin as per the carbohydrates count or the meal taken up by the individual. So that's within the I think that's within the scope of your knowledge right now. We will not discuss about that. So why early insulin initiation? To improve beta cell function. So as much as you can preserve the beta cell function, it is better for the address the microvascular and macrovascular side effect, adverse effects, and for a smooth and for the smooth functionality of the body, and as it reduces the glucotoxicity and lipotoxicity, and definitely it reverses insulin resistance, and then it has a beneficial effects on lipids. As you know, the insulin is it causes it's an anabolic so insulin is an anabolic hormone. It causes protein and lipid anabolism. So it has a beneficial effect on the lipids. It diminishes the free fatty acid in the body, and it enhances triglycerides and high density lipids. And then eventually what it does, it improves quality of life. But this is algorithm which is again beyond your scope of study, I guess, beyond the scope of your study, because this is a glucose lowering medication in type 2 diabetes, an overall approach, and I think we'll discuss about it later in the classes and in the clinics. So basically, as an initial therapy for a newly diagnosed patient, we're talking about type 2 diabetes, where we have to look for the patient status. Then HbA1c level should be, if it is less than 7.5, the first drug which should come to your mind is the metformin, along with the exercise and dietary considerations, and other drugs can be considered based on the patient's status. If metformin is not tolerated or contraindicated, the alternative choices are the DTP4 inhibitors, SGLT2 inhibitors, thiazolidines, GLP-1 receptor agonists. Sulfonylurea is one beautiful drugs which have been traditionally used. It's cost effective. The only side effect is hypoglycemia. So you have to be very particular about the diet which the person is taking while putting on them on sulfonylureas. Then you have alpha glucosidase inhibitors, and even insulin can be used in certain patients. So if initial HbA1c level is more than 7.5 or HbA1c target is not achieved with 3 months of initiating monotherapy, you can straight away start with a dual therapy, or you can switch to dual therapy if the patient is on monotherapy. And if the target is not achieved within the 3 months of initiating dual therapy, a third agent can be a complementary mechanism of action, or you can start with the once daily insulin in the form of a basal insulin, which comes in the form of glargine or degludec or detamar. So early combination therapy is preferred over maximizing the doses of a single agent when considering glucose lowering efficacy and side effects. So always remember, metformin is always maintained as a background therapy during dual or triple combination therapy. So newly diagnosed diabetes, if something comes with a symptom and HbA1c level is more than 9, if their fasting blood sugar is more than 250 and postprandial more than 350, these are totally uncontrolled diabetes, where you can straight away initiate basal insulin plus OHA, and can be intensified if the patient is not controlled. After 3 months of therapy, you can add a prandial insulin. A prandial insulin is again any bolus insulin in the form of the ultra short acting insulin, can be given before breakfast, before lunch, or before dinner, any time of the day, 3 times a day. That depends on the individual approach. Or you can add GLP-1 analog, which can be given once a week, and even you can switch to premixed insulin. So again, in the case of oral hypoglycemic agent failure, you can straight away try GLP-1 analog subcutaneous, or you can add basal insulin, or even the basal insulin not acting, you can straight away add prandial insulin along with the basal insulin OHA. And in certain cases, you can try premixed insulin if the patient doesn't want more than 2 pricks a day. So now the other adverse effects, like other as you know, that is diabetes is a multidisciplinary disease where you have to have a multidisciplinary approach, where you have to look after the hypertension and even the foot care and the cholesterol evaluations. Every other aspect of the patient has to be taken into consideration, especially for the hypertension, and especially for the patient with a higher cardiovascular risk. We need to set a blood pressure target of 130 to 80, and you can even lower it down to 120 to 180. And if the patient has a very lower risk of cardiovascular, you can keep a target of 140 to 90. So in the recent guidelines have decreased the blood pressure target level from 140 to 90 to 130 to 80 to minimize the cardiovascular risk. And the drugs to be used, most importantly, we should try using ACE inhibitor or ARBs. Then statin treatment, it has been so many conflicting results and conflicting trials, but intensive lifetime therapy and optimized glycemic control for patients with a severe elevated triglyceride levels or low HDL cholesterol, especially less than 40 milligram per deciliter for men or less than 50 milligram per deciliter for women. So patients with a higher risk, and especially those with a multiple atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease risk factor, so it is reasonable to use high intensity statin therapy in the form of atorvastatin, rosuvastatin. And in adults with diabetes at 10-year acute cardiovascular risk for 20% or higher, it may be reasonable to add ezetimibe to maximize the tolerated statin therapy to reduce LDL cholesterol levels by 50% or more. The antiplatelet agents like aspirin and low dose can be used as a secondary preventive agents, or even you can use for patients with atherosclerotic cardiovascular diseases and a documented aspirin allergy. Clopidogrel can be also be used. In chronic kidney disease, screening is very important. Once a year, assess urinary albumin or spot urinary albumin to creatinine ratio, or estimate GFR in patient with type 1 diabetes with duration of more than 5 years, and in all patients of type 2 diabetes regardless of the treatment. And patient with a urine albumin more than 30 or creatinine or GFR less than 60 should be monitored twice annually to guide therapy. And again, we have to optimize glucose control to reduce the risk and slow the progression of CKD. and especially for type 2 and diabetic kidney disease, we should consider SGLT2 inhibitors in patients with GFR less greater than 30 or urine albumin greater than 30. Do not discontinue renin angiotensin system blockade in the form of ARBs and AC inhibitors for minor decrease in serum creatinine, that is less than 30% in the absence of volume depletion. Diabetic retinopathy can be taken care of with a good glycemic control as well as to yearly eye checkups and optimize blood pressure and serum lipids. And patient should be screened by an ophthalmologist within 5 years of onset of diabetes. And if there is no evidence retinopathy, still the patient should be screened for every yearly, I would say, to stall any progression of retinopathy. The neuropathy is again a diagnosis of exclusion, and neuropathy in the forms of you have diabetic peripheral neuropathy, which is very common. Then you can have motor neuropathy or motor sensory neuropathy. So again, the recognition of the symptoms and treatment depends on the again the taking care of the lipids and hypertensions and good glycemic control. Then foot care is a very important and very most of the time we are very ignorant and very casual about the foot care modalities. So foot care is a very important aspect, and especially to identify the risk factor for ulcers and amputations. And any patients with evidence of sensory loss or prior ulceration amputation should have their feet inspected in every visit, and special care and special counseling of the patient to be done, and they should be taught about the foot care, the need for the foot care and the importance of the foot care. So this is all about diabetes. In the next class we'll talk about the acute complications of diabetes, and we'll finish up with the diabetes in the next class so that we can take up the other endocrinal topics. Any question, just shoot any question you have so we can address your question. Any question related to diabetes you have. This is a very important topic, and even while in clinics and in the further classes, you can always come up with your doubts. Right now, if you have any drug of choice for diabetic neuropathy, the drug of choice doesn't change as far as diabetic neuropathy is concerned. It's basically, it is neuropathy is again one of microvascular complication, and basically mostly the drugs which are insulin sensitizers and even the drugs which induces insulin secretions, like in the form of metformin is one of the most potent and one drug which acts through multiple mechanism of action. So there's no particular drug as such, but any drug which can keep a good glycemic control and a tight glycemic control can address the progression of diabetic neuropathy. Anything else you would like to ask? Diabetic is a very complex and is a very interesting topic, and as you go slowly and frugally as you go by your observations and the guidelines, and you see them most of the patients, you know the prevalence of diabetes, you will need to learn a lot more about diabetes, and we can have a lot more healthy discussion about diabetes in the later classes. So we call it a day. Thank you so much for your patient listening. We'll meet in the next class with the acute complication of the diabetes, and we'll try to wrap up diabetes in the next class so we can take up other endocrinal topics. I hope it is convenient and it's you able to comprehend this topic, because it's a very large topic, especially with the classification and and the treatment part which you have to know. Okay, thank you class.